India has been put in the corner because Trump's ultimate aim is that India should stop buying arms from Russia.
The master of bluster and of hype and of escalation as a form, as a style of negotiating.
Does he want India to cozy up to China, which no American would like?
India's success is America's success because India is the only possible counterbalance.
Trump is ignoring all that to satisfy his ego.
Hello and welcome to Tracking Trump on deKoder. I'm Nidhi Razdan. Well, in the last 24 hours or so, Trump has substantially escalated his attack against India on the issue of tariffs. In fact, in the last few minutes, he has spoken to the media in the US and said that I think I'm going to raise India's tariffs very substantially in the next 24 hours, as he accused India once again of fueling the war machine between Russia and Ukraine. And this was his social media post earlier, where he basically attacked India for buying Russian oil and said that he would then substantially raise tariffs paid by India for what he said was buying Russian oil, which then fueled the Russian war machine, something that he's repeated again and substantially, in a sense, up the ante in this war of words with India. And we saw for the first time, in fact, yesterday, a more strongly worded statement from the Ministry of External Affairs in Delhi, which basically said that the targeting of India was unjustified and unreasonable. It was a detailed statement that also, in a sense, highlighted the double standards of both America and the European Union that do still trade with Russia, whether it's with chemicals, fertilizers, and other things, and pointed out that if they can take care of their interests, whether it's security interests, economic interests, India would do so as well. Now, what does all this really mean for the America-India relationship, and where will Trump's tariff war eventually lead America to? Is it actually going to end up strengthening China in the long term? Lots of interesting questions that are floating around at this point. And let me please welcome my panel today. Former diplomat Rajiv Dogra joining us from Delhi today. Also with us, Edward Luce, associate editor with the Financial Times, is in Washington, D.C. Thank you both very much for joining us. Ambassador Dogra, to you first. There seems to be a significant escalation by Mr. Trump in the last few days on this tariff issue. Do you believe that this is a substantial setback to the India-US relationship, which has been so painstakingly been built over the last 30 years and has largely had bipartisan support till now?
You know, it's such a pity that we should be at this stage where there's pessimism in the air, not just on television talk shows or in newspaper editorials, but also amongst the common man, common people in India. That why is this happening? In fact, Indians had gone to the other extreme and held prayers for Trump during his second election bid. So from there, now Indians are saying, normal Indians are saying that what has happened to this man? Has he gone? I won't use the word, but they are deeply disappointed. But on a more practical note and on a more diplomatic note, I think this is not the language for a leader of the greatest democracy that America calls itself to speak in. This is not the language that statesmen or people aspiring for Nobel Peace Prize should be using, because he is firstly misinforming his own people by repeatedly saying that India is importing large amounts of energy, quite forgetting the fact that America a couple of years back, through their ambassador in Delhi, had suggested to India that it must increase its energy imports from Russia, because otherwise the oil prices will go through the roof. So India did what America wanted. But now India has been put in the corner because Trump feels that somehow oil is the starting point. What his ultimate aim is that India should stop buying arms from Russia. What his ultimate aim is that India should also dissociate itself from Russia in terms of any kind of partnership, whether it is for the manufacture of the missiles here or
But you know what?
uh,
What seems to be what seems to stand out here is that, and I just bring Edward Luce into the conversation now. Edward Luce, it's been widely believed and analyzed that Trump uses threats of tariffs to negotiate. He's basically a businessman, and he uses these threats to get better deals with countries, and many countries have rushed through America to strike trade deals. India is also in talks with the US. But with India, it seems to have taken on a very different tone, almost imperialist. And it's gone down very, very badly in Delhi, as you heard Ambassador Dogra say. But what explains his turnaround on Russia, and why he's doing this with India?
So on Russia, he's sort of developed a latent bee in his bonnet about Vladimir Putin's obdurate responses to Trump's repeated pleas with him to agree to a ceasefire. As you remember, Trump promised to fix the war in Ukraine within 24 hours. Then he extended that to 100 days. Well, we're now at 200 days or so. And every time he asks Putin for a ceasefire, the Russians actually step up their missile and drone attacks on Ukraine in the following 24 hours. So it's kind of, it's like rubbing salt into Trump's wound. It sort of damaged his pride. He thought he and Putin had some kind of affinity. So he has, at least for the time being, done a 180-degree turn on the Ukraine war and is now saying, we approve arms shipments to Ukraine if the Europeans pay for them. And that, I think, it feeds in to all these deadlines about reaching bilateral trade deals, including especially with the big countries, India being one of them. And I think he thinks that this is leverage that he's got, the threat of 100% secondary tariffs on India if it keeps buying Russian oil and oil products. And of course, he's the master of bluster and of hype and of escalation as a form, as a style of negotiating. It doesn't always work. I mean, he pushed tariffs up to 145% on China, and China imposed an export ban on these critical minerals and these rare earths that feed into so many defense and non-defense.
Then he was walking back from it, yeah.
And then he caved. Hence the phrase "Trump always chickens out." He doesn't always chicken out, but he has over China. And so I think the question with India is it prepared to sort of sustain this, I think, very understandable and principled response to Trump's invective? And if so, where is India's leverage? It's not so obvious where it is. There is no equivalent to an Indian stranglehold on critical minerals.
Right. So I want to come to two different aspects of this as we try to look ahead at what India can do and what its options are. The first, Ambassador Dogra, was a very interesting piece written by Ambassador Shyam Saran, India's former foreign secretary, where he argued very forcefully just yesterday that India needs to stand up to Donald Trump, and if that means sort of bearing some economic pain, then it should be ready to do so. We've done it in the past where we've been isolated on our stand on, let's say, the CTBT or the NPT, and we stood our ground and stood up and took a principled stand. And his argument was essentially what I also argued in a piece, is that if you don't stand up to a bully, he will keep coming to beat you up. Do you agree with that? Is India in a position to really push back here?
Well, there are two questions. One, whether India will stand firm. The answer to that is yes, India is going to stand firm, because if it does not, then it will fall flat on its face, not just on agricultural front, where India is a heavily agriculture dependent economy. So do we want to kill our farmers en masse? Do we want to destroy our agricultural output altogether in favor of GM seeds from America? No. So India has gone through this kind of a bullying earlier also, as Shyam pointed out and as you repeated, on the nuclear front. So I don't think there's going to be much give there, because as I said earlier, tariff is just one issue. The others will follow, especially the defense side, because Trump sees billions of dollars there. But that apart, the major issue which bothers me is that why has Trump singled out India when he knows that purely on energy front, which is what he's concentrating on presently, there are three major buyers. One is China, the other is India, and the third is Turkey. He has not named Turkey at all. He has sort of very, very carefully stayed away from confronting China on the energy issue, except in passing once or twice.
But is that because,
he
as
is
Edward
hounding
Luce
India.
says, that there is the Chinese have leverage? Do we have any leverage with the US?
Well, the question is not just the leverage with US. The question is that does Trump want India to be totally isolated from Russia? The question is also that if there is differences to the point of being unbridgeable between USA and India, then does he want India to cozy up to China, which no American would like? So that is the leverage. The leverage is also what will happen if India keeps standing firm. It will give a message out to Brazil. It will give a message out to maybe Canada also, and to many other countries like Indonesia, Vietnam,
Well, actually,
and so on.
they've already taken a pretty tough stand. And, you made an interesting point there about China. And I'll bring that to Edward Luce, that could, Trump's entire war, tariff war, actually strengthen an organization like BRICS, where you have Brazil, Russia, India, and China, along with South Africa? Could it actually end up bringing all these countries closer together? And if that happens, what would the potential impact of that be?
I think for sure other forms of multipolarity and arrangements that, bypass the United States are going to gather steam in various ad hoc ways all over the world, BRICS among them. I mean, it is hard to sort of see BRICS really deepening and, getting an alternative reserve currency to the dollar, because BRICS includes China and India, and I just don't believe India is going to sort of agree to that kind of thing in a group with China. But for sure, you see countries that have been neuralgic about China, suspicious, hostile, have ancient enmities with China, moving closer to China, Japan and South Korea, at least on trade and economics in the last few months. And India has softened its tone with China, because the sort of overarching point, the geopolitical angle to this trade war, these multiple trade wars that Trump has launched on countries like India and all around the world, is that he doesn't seem to share the bipartisan hawkish consensus in Washington about China. And that's why he's abandoning more than a quarter of a century here of an American foreign policy that believes that India's success is America's success, because India is the only possible counterbalance in the world to China. And so this is I'm not sure whether he's thought through the geopolitical consequences of this. I mean, because he's very transactional. He's a mercantilist, which means he believes any trade deficit is a measure of how much America is being ripped off. And it's about $40 billion or so with India, the trade deficit. I'm not sure whether he's thought through the geopolitical consequences of this, but you can bet your bottom dollar everybody else in Washington, including most of his administration, are aware of the fact that he is alienating friends, and shows an extraordinary amount of deference and fascination to the adversary here, which the chief one is of course China.
If I could ask perhaps a stupid question, and I'll ask Mr. Luce that question first, which is that what if a country like India was to strike trade deals with other countries, with South America, with other, with the EU, with China, with BRICS nations, whatever. If we did FTAs with these countries, would that offset the damage of American tariffs?
So I think it's no coincidence that earlier this year, after Trump had been inaugurated, there was a UK-India trade
Yes.
deal. The context that, well, you've got to do real ones elsewhere. Trump's got these kabuki deals that essentially amount to him posting on social media what the tariff rate is. There don't seem to be any texts to most of these agreements. And with Trump, because Trump is Trump, even if there were texts, you wouldn't know whether 3 months from now he would just turn around and tear it up and say, oh, I want a new deal. So every other country in the world is in some form or other going to be looking for, and ought to be, it would be advisable for them to be looking for more permanent and seriously negotiated trade arrangements to cope with this sort of capricious unilateralism that will be a feature of America whilst Trump is in office. And that means another at least 3.5 years of this. Economies like India cannot depend on deals, and deal is a big word, with Trump.
Ambassador Dogra, one point of view that seems to be emerging within a section of the diplomatic community in India also is, should we still do this trade deal? Should we still have these trade deals talks with the US? Should India pause them? Can we afford to do that? Are we in a position to walk away from this? I mean, if this deal was to go through on fair terms and conditions, it would probably be good for India also. We are actually quite a protectionist economy. This could give us a chance to reform our own tariff structure. But obviously on our terms and on India, based on what India's interests are, isn't it? But do you believe these trade talks at the moment should be paused or they should continue?
Well, firstly, I should say that I agree entirely with what Edward has just said a minute back. And to answer your question, even in the worst of circumstances, even during wars, diplomats don't give up. And trade deals, trade talks must go on, because there could be some via media where even Trump sees reason. It's a very hard thing to imagine that Trump will somehow climb down from his extreme position. But you never know, miracles do happen. But talking of purely of trade in terms of India-US, $40 billion, yes, that is the deficit in India's favor. But there's also the services sector, where America has enormous advantage, which wipes out the entire $40 billion. There's also the Indian students, about 200,000 by the last measure, who are remitting, or whose parents are remitting about 12 or 15 billion dollars every year for their studies. So numbers can be deceptive, but much more important than numbers in financial terms is the fact that this is a relationship which has taken a lot of years to develop to a stage where we could say that India and USA are now on a stable course. And there was hope that after a non-controversial first term of Trump, the second Trump term would build on that, because there was nothing exceptional which had occurred during this term, during this period. So it's a pity that Trump is ignoring all that to satisfy his ego. And one point which seems to have triggered his ego in a negative sense is that India denied that Trump was responsible for the truce between India and Pakistan. And to give you one small example, there are many other issues. There are reports that Pakistani individuals are fighting with Russian forces against Ukraine. So when Trump says that India buying energy is killing Ukrainians, why doesn't he have a look at the number of Pakistani people who are killing Ukrainians on the battlefield there? But arguments with Trump cannot be won because Trump is closed in his mind. Another thing which I want...
Sorry, so just another interesting point which has emerged also in the last week or so. And Edward Luce, one was the jobs report, which infuriated Trump, the domestic US jobs report. He even fired the official in charge of the Labor Department that gave these jobs numbers because hiring was down. He didn't like the numbers, so he fired the official. But also, I was reading that for the first time, American consumers are actually beginning to feel the pinch from these tariffs. I mean, it's early days, but prices are now being passed on to consumers. So, if you could tell us a little bit about that, I mean, could this potentially domestically backfire on Trump if people start to see prices go up on, they're already up on toys, I believe, and some other essential goods, but as these go up more and more, could this hurt him domestically as well?
It could. I mean, he's been sort of gunning for Jerome Powell, the chair of the US Federal Reserve, to cut interest rates, calling him a dumbass, an idiot, a moron. I mean, this is, all unprecedented for a US president to call the central bank governor such names. And the effect, the price effect on the consumer shelves of these higher tariffs is going to encourage the Fed to go in the opposite direction because they don't want to cut interest rates while inflation is rising. Trump has a well-developed line in shooting the messenger. And, one of those messengers is Jerome Powell. Another is the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, who compiles this data, who he fired, as you pointed out. He did promise not just to reduce inflation, but to reduce prices, which is actually technically deflation. What we're seeing is the opposite. And one would imagine this will cause quite a lot of political angst as the midterm elections hove into view amongst Republicans who fear losing their seats. But how that plays out, I mean, Trump is a master of deception and of deflection and of scapegoating others, particularly immigrants and foreign students increasingly, of which there are many, many hundreds of thousands of Indian foreign students. The ambassador points out a lot of money for America. So I'd hesitate to predict the direction this will go in because Trump, at his heart, remains a deeply unpredictable character.
And that therein lies the problem. I'm out of time on this episode today, but lots to talk about once his new penalties kick in. We'll have to see how that plays out, the economic impact on India politically, how this plays out, how Delhi chooses to respond. Thank you very much, Edward Luce, Ambassador Dogra, for joining us today. And of course, when it comes to Donald Trump, the internet is full of memes, of jokes, all kinds of stuff. We leave you with some of the best that we've compiled for the week. See you again next week.